Thank you again, as always. Incredible worship, and I'm honestly so excited for this message. Obviously, it hurts. I'm heartbroken, and you'll hear more why, but it's such an important message. And like I said before, this is my good buddy. This is John Paul Howard. We've known each other for years. So before and what we're going to do, just to give you a little bit of kind of the background or what we're going to be doing, is we really want to have a conversation on the topic of race and racism and what's happening in this time right now, and just really believe in your voice as Gen Z and everyone watching that you have a part to play in it, whether you're black, brown, white, whatever, whether you're a person of color or not. We just believe that you have a voice, but it's super important. And even as, helping out lead CR Youth, me and my wife, we wanted to lean in to listen to the black voice in the black community. And so John Paul is just such a good friend and a leader in our community. And so why don't you tell him a little bit about yourself, and then we'll jump into these questions.
Yeah, like you said, my name is John Paul. I'm from Detroit, Michigan originally. I've been a part of CR. I've known Sammy since 2000. Is it 12 or 13?
Something like that, back in the day.
Yeah, back in the day.
Met in Boston, shout out.
Met in Boston while I was in school, and yeah, I've been rolling with the crew in different ways for a while now. I've been more recently leading a project called The Couch, which is simply what we're doing right now. We promote listening, we promote having conversations, meaningful conversations around matters of race and any other topic that tends to be a little bit more hard to talk about in our country. And so hopefully what we do today helps.
And I know it will. And so I would encourage you, lean forward. I'm going to ask John Paul some questions, some very pointed questions, and just want him to share what's on his heart, both his experience, but also what he's seen. And I love so many things about John Paul, even where we just came from, which we'll talk about in a question, but just this is so important, not only to do this, obviously what we're doing right now live, but even with your friends. And if you have people in your life that are black, which you probably, if you don't, that's a problem. Do you know what I'm saying? But honestly, and not out of pressure, but now's the time to be I'm with you, I'm standing with you, listening to them. So we're just going to jump straight in. So John, obviously, you do this for a living with The Couch, shout out, but I want to ask the first question is, who is George Floyd and why are we hearing his name?
Yeah, it's a good question. George Floyd, in simplicity, was a man, and specifically a black man, who he wasn't necessarily from Minneapolis, but he was there. And within the last couple of weeks, all of us as a nation, you and I, probably a lot of you saw a video of him being, I would even consider, tortured for 8-9 straight minutes by a police officer. And so, which ended up inciting, we didn't know if it was going to do this much. Of course, there was going to be a response from the community, at least the local community, and maybe some surrounding ones. But right now, we're saying his name all over the world, which is crazy. And I think we're saying his name, yes, one, because we want justice for him specifically. It's important that we see justice for his specific case, because we all are a part of it. We've seen the grossness that was a part of it, and so we want justice for him, and that's why we continue to say his name. But I feel like his name has become much bigger, and we've remembered all of the cases similar to his, the ones that weren't recorded. And we're also saying his name for the future and wanting to change and not wanting to have another George Floyd. We're saying his name because we want this to be the last one, We want this to be the last name that we say in this context, where a cop or anyone of authority can take a life and there be delayed justice or no justice at all. We want this to be the last name that we have to say. And at least this will be the last name that we'll have to say without us having so much to say about it, We don't ever want this to happen and it become normal. I think that's what happened to us, is that we saw so many up until his, Ahmaud Arbery, Breonna Taylor, so many before that, where it just got normal. And I think this is a moment, because it happened so closely off the back of Ahmaud Arbery and Breonna Taylor, that as a nation, as a black community, but as the world, we're just okay, this is enough. We can't keep doing this. So his name really means so much right now.
It's it's like you said, we're fighting for justice for him, for his specific case, Brianna and Ahmad, but it has turned into a catalyst for, you know, so many years of pain, and that we need to see change. Though we have seen areas of change, but it's showing that in 2020, we may not be as far along as we would have thought. Yeah. And it's been a catalyst. And so this follow-up question with it is, I mean, people are protesting. You already seen like one just incredible thing about even what's happening in the pain is that all 50 states have protested and peaceful. And we're not, just so you know, like we've been to those peaceful protests. We've even just came from one that the church organized here in Orange County, Costa Mesa. You shared at it. That was just, I mean, we're still reeling. We gotta figure that out. But like that just was an incredible moment. But what the second question I want to ask you is, in your own words, define racism.
Yeah, I think that's a really important question. I think because there's two different definitions of, they're both very real and both very gross, but I think the one that we're most familiar with is, you know, KKK, calling someone the N-word, just like these very expressive and clear, overt expressions of racism, where you can look at a person and say, oh, okay, this person is being very clear with what they believe. I think there's another definition of racism that more so points to the nation and the system that we live in America, and one that is set up to highlight and support and uplift one race over the other. And so I think that racism sometimes is a little bit more, I said overt the first time, this one is a little bit more covert, where it can look like discriminating within your friend groups, and discriminating within a hiring process for a job. And those things aren't even necessarily clear to us all the time. It's just because we've seen whiteness to be better in a lot of ways, and white skin to be a little bit more polished and polite and not so much in your face, that we're a lot quicker to gravitate to those kind of things. And so I think on the grander scale, I think what most Americans participate in, the form of racism that's participated in more often in America is one that is covert and is subconscious and is like behind the scenes, you know? But it influences our decisions all the time. And until we decide that, like, okay, there is not just black people, a lot of white people are understanding this more and more. I think it's important that we continue to lean into, okay, what does that mean? How am I? Racism is not, racist is not a slur, you know? When someone calls someone else racist, it's not a slur. It's just identifying what is. And so I think if we can believe that, we'll be better for it, you know? It's like, okay, no one's attacking me right now. We're all becoming less racist. And I have to stop believing things about myself that are racist, you know? Because of the world that we live in, there's things that I believe about black people and about myself that I'm like, okay, I got to change that. That is racist thinking, and that is putting me down, and that's putting others down. And so when we stop looking at racism,
and that's covertly like almost like a thinking that has been instilled that we need to change
because of our history.
And I feel like overtly everyone sees it in many ways, or most, I would say, right? But it's the covertly, it feels like that is what's being even more called to the surface as saying it's not okay. And that's what Jesus did too. As we look in the gospel, which we're going to look at a story in a second. But it's like, it feels like the covert areas is just being like, okay, and even though it has been enough is enough, but it feels like another level of like, enough is enough. And even in your words, again, we'll keep rolling through, but obviously you define racism. Talk to me even about like systemic racism. Does that make sense? Like why? Like it feels as if, you know, when people say, well, that, you know, that was back then, or all that stuff. And obviously everyone who's watching here is with us, right? They're catalysts, they're revivalists. But a lot of people don't know what to say. But why is there even such a reaction? The pain. Even talk to me about how long it's been going on. You kind of shared a little bit, but does that make sense with systemic racism?
Yeah. That's a good question.
And it doesn't have to be perfect, obviously, you know, but like just even in your own words, you know?
Yeah. I mean, I think systemic racism, systematic racism, again, is one. So let's look at the situation that's at hand.
Yeah.
And again, whenever you say Black Lives Matter or COP or whatever, all these buzzwords right now, people get like, but let's just talk about it for what it is.
Yeah.
We look at a situation like George Floyd,
Right.
Ahmaud Arbery, others, or let's talk about Michael Brown, which happened a few years back.
Mm-hmm.
The cop that shot him 9 times, and he said it felt like a demon was running towards me. So I'm like, how do you see a black man and no matter what's going on, there's a situation where you're not the only cop present, there's multiple, you outnumber this man, and you feel so threatened because you look in his face and you're like, this is a demon, I have to kill this man now. And so I think, that's part of the system that we look at is that the system allows for murders like that. I like to say that the system sponsors murders like the one that we've seen in the last, few weeks. Is that like it makes it okay? And so many officers have gotten off on these cases because we made it okay to identify a man as a demon and say, I'm going to take his life, And so I think that's we write it into our laws, we write it into our bylaws, into the way we do our businesses, into the way we construct schools. We're like, okay, this kid is more outspoken, he's bad, isolate him, put him in this class, put him with this group. It is very systematized, if that's not too much of a big word for this group. But I think it's important to know that this is, these are decisions that are made on paper.
And it's not just even a new problem. This has been going on for years.
For a long time, since our inception,
Right.
And so, of course, we go through a foundational core in our history of overt racism. And then it's repurposed itself, taking it on a new face with laws like Jim Crow that were like separate but equal. This group is lesser than this one, separate bathrooms. So it looks like that, where it's like, okay, yeah, separate but equal, but, essentially you still don't belong here and you still are lesser than. But again, we write these things into the law and into the structural way of how we do society. And so I think generationally it keeps showing its face in a new way. And so that's why I think this moment is so important, because that's coming to the surface, that this real evil that exists in the world is being so exposed on a very particular and minute level, that we do have an opportunity to.
It really is the catalyst, and it feels as if more than ever, that people are speaking out in an incredible way, and that we want to continue to encourage people speaking out. But I think what you said is, just the pain, the history of the pain, and from covert to overt, from overt to covert, and all that stuff that's been going on. And so as we keep going, because we have just a few more minutes, we want to keep having this conversation. But one question that was asked that I thought was, because we're talking about truths of just from laws to just the history, the pain of it, right? Christian Gonzalez, shout out, our boy, when he talked about, I just always think of when people say, racial reconciliation. We're not reconciling back, because if we go back, we're actually going back to, what it started with. We're actually conciliating, we're pushing forward, And so I think we're not even going back to
something new.
Exactly, and it has to be that. And so even we'll talk about this generation, but for you, what was it like? What was it like to be a black teenager in America? Like your experiences, you know what I'm saying?
Yeah. I think I have an interesting story, because I grew up in Detroit, which while I was living there was over 90% black.
Wow.
And so I lived there until my sophomore year of high school, and I moved to a neighboring city that was predominantly white. And both situations are very unique because in the first one, living in Detroit, you still have an awareness of white people. But for me growing up, it was like Jeopardy and like all these different shows. You know, I'm like, oh, those, you know, like there's white people out there somewhere, and they feel like they're controlling this world a little bit.
Yeah, but you're in a community that's 90% or more.
Yeah.
You know.
But I still, it's weird. Even in those times, I still felt like, because they were on the TV, which felt so like outside of this world, and because they were like, I would hear rumors of white people. It's like, wow, like it's almost a fascination of like, is that a higher life? Is it a better life to be amongst white people? And then I get into a white setting with white students and white people around me, and it was just the most confusing time of my life because it was culture shock.
Wow.
I'm a kid. I don't have any language for like who these people are, what they're doing, how they're talking to me. I was like a trophy or like a prized possession, you know? Yeah, a token. Yeah. It was being that young and not having language. Yeah. I was so quiet in those settings because I'm a very observant person. I like to learn, just soak in stuff, you know? So to be in this new environment where like, and that's not even to say that whiteness is bad or like being around white students is bad. It was just, there were some things that were uncomfortable, but more than that, it was just like a whole new world. Yeah. And so I come from this very strong black family. I go home and I'm like so close with my sisters. Right. My dad has a crazy history in activism. Wow. I go home and there's libraries of books of just black history and stuff. And so I'm being informed by that. And then I go to school and it's like, I'm learning a whole new language, you know? Wow. And so I think, to me that's interesting. And looking back with more language, I'm just like,
right. Just the culture shock and really the two different worlds even.
Yeah, completely different worlds.
From even, like you said, having them on a pedestal in the sense of like, is it better? And then being there and then feeling like a token and then probably not having all the language for it and all the both probably covert and overt things that happen to you.
And thinking that I have to learn everything and become better. Because I'm still carrying some of that stuff from living there. I'm like, maybe it is better. Maybe I got to learn all this stuff really fast and just be
change
a better
yourself.
Human. Yeah. Yeah.
Wow. That's profound. In light of this, obviously we have a few more minutes, but a lot of maybe if someone's watching this right now and they're a Christian and obviously Circle Riders, we've been with it for years. We're catalysts, we're revivalists. I love the doctor that jumped on, Dr. Sims, when he shared about the Bible verse, righteousness and justice are the foundation of your throne in the Psalms. Yeah. And as Christians, we got to fight for both righteousness and justice. And so, but so many people right now watching this live are like, I'm with you. We declare Black Lives Matter. And us saying this, it's that whole saying that's been saying all lives don't matter until Black Lives Matter. Yeah. And we're championing that. But if someone is not a person of color, right? Or specifically if there's someone white watching and they don't know what to say, right? A lot of people probably asking you, asking so many people. I got friends asking me like, what do I start? What do I say? Should I say anything? Like, what would you encourage someone like that, right? It's like, if they're white, where do they start and what do they say? Or even if they're just, if they're not black, right? If they're not a person of color, what would you encourage them to say?
Yeah.
Or even start. Does that make sense?
Yeah, for sure. I'm gonna just talk to. Is that okay if I talk to the camera?
Talk straight to them.
Just cause, I'm talking to them now and I'm facing you.
I'm listening.
I think it's very, very important, and I've been trying to tell as many people as possible who are not black, because right now I think everyone is being almost force-fed black history, black culture, and the black voice. Everyone's hearing it. I think it's also important for anyone that's not black watching this to look at your own history, and I don't mean like the history that we learn in school. Like, I'm not telling you just to go to class and like learn something.
Their personal history.
Your personal history, because I think every person in America has a history and a heritage in this conversation on racism And so a lot of times what happens is we get to these conversations and we think that we have to learn everything about Black people and learn how to talk to Black people and learn Black history, which is part of that narrative.
Right.
But I think it's also important that you learn your ancestral history and learn like what your, how, this has to become a personal story, you know? This isn't just about helping and fixing Black people. This is about like helping and fixing America.
Yeah.
And so you need to know, like, you need to be personally invested in how you got to this place that you are now in the world, you know? And so it's not just about like, oh, we're just here to celebrate and be with Black people, but it's about, no, I'm a part of this and I want to be a part of the solution, you know? Yeah. And so where are the problems? What's my family history? And get personally invested in this story. So.
That's so good. And I would say, like, even just to add on it, what we've been talking about, I was on a live, you know, talking. I really felt, and John does this all the time, but I just felt from the Lord, there's power in conversation. Mm-hmm. And I felt like if I could challenge you, right? So you guys know my dad's a Latino, mom's white, but then grew up more around my dad's side, kind of maybe leaned towards more, even feeling myself a minority, but I am mixed as well. So even having conversations, you know, with my family who are incredible. But what I'm saying is, if you are not, because I'm not Black, even though I feel like I am at times, but I'm not. But what I'm saying is, if you're not, like, I really felt like it was important to have conversation. And I felt like the Lord told me, like, to listen, to learn, and then to lend your privilege. Wow. And I just felt like it was that clear. I just heard the Lord say, listen, learn, and lend your privilege. And everything John just said, like, learn your own story and history, for sure. But I feel like it's so important. And again, I'm not forcing, like, we have a history of friendship. Yeah. And so there's trust built that we could have conversation. So don't just go straight away to someone who you don't know and be like, tell me everything. Like, have those conversations where we're building trust. But in the midst of it, if you have someone like a John, or like our boy Alvin or Reese, or so many of my good friends, you know, Josiah, I could go on and on and on. Now's a moment to just listen, learn, and lend your privilege. Yeah. And I think it's so important, we talked about this earlier, is it's important to, and I heard when John Grant and Carl were having a conversation, this is when Ahmad was going on, when that video came out, is John said, we got to keep having this conversation, but it has to happen in white communities. Yeah. White, and so I would encourage you, like, that even if you are white, like, have those moments, because, you know, prejudice, racist moments, overt or covert, happen a lot of times, both when people of color are there, like specifically Black people or anyone, but what happens when no one's there and a joke is made or something said. And now's a moment, like, more than ever, to stand and use your voice to really listen, learn, and lend your privilege. And so I would encourage you in those things, and I think that will be powerful. And sorry, segueing into this, what we talked about, what can our generation do? Gen Z, you talked about, you know, what you really feel like they're gonna do as teenagers. Because a lot of times, like, I'm a teenager, or I'm young, not even, you know, middle school, high school. Yeah. What can they do if they feel like, I don't know if I have people listening? Like, just tell them about that.
Yeah. Yeah, I would just encourage you guys. I think that when we look at history and just the few movements that we've studied, and it's always been your age group that is, like, given language and given just, like, the strength behind the movement. That's right. You look at the age of, even going back to, we all know this, the age of Jesus and his disciples, and and how such young teenagers really took over the world and had a clear message on the gospel and were foundational for the church. Yeah. And so I think it's a old, tired, and untrue statement and narrative that you guys have to wait. Wow. You know, and learn everything. But I feel like there are truths on the inside of you that you have to teach an older generation. 'Cause I think you're looking purely at, like, what we're doing. And what the older generation is doing, and something in you is saying, like, this is off, this is not right, you know? Something has to change. I might not even know exactly what it is yet, but even just the simple fact of saying, like, this needs to change, you know, is a very powerful statement. And to look critically at, like, what we've done so far and say, that's not working, you know? I just want to, can I tell a quick story real quick? Yeah, go for it. I was reading a poem or a story from a woman She said she wrote she wrote a story about parents and a young child, and on the street they came out and they saw a big dog, and they were excited to bring the kid up to it, and the kid kind of shrinks back and says like, this isn't, is almost nervous, and the parents ask him why, and all he says is like, it's a big dog, you know? And they're like, oh, it's all the same. It's a small dog, a big dog, whatever. And the kid just kept saying, no, it's a big dog, it's a big dog, it's a big dog. He had an understanding that like, this is a little bit more scary than a smaller one, you know?
Yeah.
And so I don't, in that story, the kid had like very basic language. He couldn't explain all the ins and outs of why this is a scarier situation.
Right.
But I feel like that's kind of like where we find ourselves a lot of times, is like, we know something is off about this situation.
Right.
Something is off about like what's happening in this country. And it is okay to say that, you know? And you can learn all the words and the things to say later on top of it, and you can learn the history as you go. But even just starting from a place of just saying, okay, something is not right here, and allowing that to be like the words that you continue to say to previous generations, I think it'll be very powerful.
Wow. And I think we said this even as we were talking, and I know you probably said it even in that, is you're charging this generation, Gen Z, and like these one watch high school, middle school with ownership. Yeah. Like, and that's what we talked about. And just to let you know, like, we just so believe in you, and just believe that wherever you're at, and God created you to be alive today. Yeah. Whether you're white, black, Latino, Asian, whatever your background, color of your skin, God is the one who created you to be that way. And he's put a voice inside of you. And I just would encourage you, like John said, is just take ownership for your generation. This is true. It's the most, Gen Z is your generation is the most diverse generation ever. Wow. It is more, I think, if I'm not mistaken, correct me if I'm wrong, but more diverse, more like minority than it isn't. Like, which is so crazy to think of, or at least leading that way. And so I just think your generation is already passionate, not only about right living, but about social justice issues. And so we as, millennials, smack dab, we just champion you. Is like, it's not just our job. Like, we believe your voice matters, and it's going to be important for you to speak up and share. And so as we're coming to an end, we wanted to, because, the answer for this, Jesus is the answer. Like, Jesus is the one who came and paid the price and destroys all works of darkness. We know that, but Jesus spoke to areas of racism in his time. And so we want to find, even like, where is Jesus in this moment? And even in the word, like, we want to look at that, because it's not, Jesus was never void. If you look at it, we don't have time to go through all of it, but woman at the well, she was a Samaritan woman. That, there was racism, prejudice between Samaritans and Jews at the time, that you would never bridge that gap. Jesus pressed past that and addressed that. You look at John 8, the woman caught in adultery. You look at so many different aspects of where Jesus pressed past. The demonized man that, he crossed over and was with, the Gentiles. There's so many moments, but one story I want to hit on, and we could just dialogue back and forth, or maybe two. I love this, picture when, Luke 15 has always been about, the sheep, the 100 sheep, the 10 coins, the prodigal son. But I love this. There's been just a simple picture of Jesus leaving the 99 to reach the one. And that one being one that was hurting, was broken. And it's so easy to be like, where people say like, Black Lives Matter. And then it's like, no, like, don't all lives matter? Well, yes, all lives can't matter until Black Lives Matter. And so Jesus was always, he always was focused on whatever was hurting, whatever was broken, whoever was there in a community or a person that was hurting, he championed that person, right? It's like Carl said this in this video. He goes, that statement, Black Lives Matter, is a statement that we're saying they matter to us as Christians, to circuit riders, they really do. And it's like, people would say, when you say that statement, Carl was saying in the video, those would be the same people that correct Jesus when he said, blessed are the poor. And he goes, no, blessed are all people, Jesus. And it just was like so simple but profound, that we're fighting for a community, fighting for a people that we're not even, here's the crazy thing, we're not even fighting that other communities are pulled back. We're fighting for us all to start at the same level. And people have a hard issue with that. But as circuit riders, as CR youth, we will always fight for the underprivileged, the voices that aren't heard, the voices that are kicked to the side. Everything John just shared, it's like we don't want that to be his experience. We want his experience to be a place of equality, to be a place that we're doing it together. And so the story I want to really land on, I shared a few, but I think it's Luke 10. It talks about as a lawyer, a rich guy, he just asked how do I actually let me read it. We have a little bit of time, and then we're gonna let you go. But I feel like it's so important. The parable of the Good Samaritan said, "Behold, a lawyer stood up," Luke 10:25, and the lawyer stood up and said to him, "Teacher, what shall I do to inherit eternal life?" And he said to him, Jesus says, "What is written in the law? How do you read it?" And the lawyer says, and he answered, "You shall love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, with all your strength, and with all your mind. And you shall love your neighbor as yourself." Verse 28, and he said to him, Jesus says to the lawyer, "You have answered correctly. Do this and you will live." But he, the lawyer, desiring to justify himself to Jesus, says, "And who is my neighbor?" Yeah. Great question, right? And Jesus replied, right? A man was going down from Jerusalem to Jericho, this story of the Good Samaritan, and he fell among robbers who stripped him and beat him and departed, leaving him half dead. Now by chance a priest was going down that road, and when he saw him, he passed on the other side. So likewise a Levite, a worshiper, when he came to the place, saw him and passed on the other side. But check this out: a Samaritan, as he journeyed, came to where this guy was, and when he saw him, he had compassion. And I think that's so important. And he went out and he went to him and bound up his wounds, pouring on oil and wine. And then he sent him on his own animal, brought him to an inn, took care of him. And the next day he took out 2 denarii, right, which was a day's wage. So 2 days' wages he took out and gave him to the innkeeper, saying, "Take care of him, and whatever more you spend, I will repay. I will repay you when I come back." Which of these, Jesus is asking, these 3, do you think proved to be a neighbor to the man who fell among the robbers? And the lawyer said, "The one who showed him mercy." And Jesus said to him, "You go and do likewise." Yeah. I just feel like, man, and I want you to respond with the final charge. But what I want to take away is, the lawyer, he's like, "Who is my neighbor?" Yeah, love the Lord your God, all heart, soul, mind, strength. Love your neighbor yourself. Who is my neighbor? And Jesus specifically says a racially charged story. Yeah. Isn't that crazy? Like he's talking to Jews and tells a story that the priest, which will be a modern day pastor, a Levite, which will be a modern day worship. So the leaders of the church, right? This man, robbers came and left him half dead, right? With George Floyd is fully passed, which our heart breaks. Yeah. But with this man, he was half dead. And the leaders of the church, the leaders of that time, according to the Jewish community, all passed by on the other side. They didn't even want to touch it. They went on the other side and kept going. And I think a lot of times we avoid hard conversations, things that make us uncomfortable, or we're so in a hurry that, an interruption actually is masked in an interruption, but really it's a miracle waiting to happen. Yep. Jesus there, but we move forward because we're rushing to get somewhere. Oh, someone else will help out. But then the story, the Good Samaritan, right? So at this time, people know Samaritans were looked at as less than even human. They were looked at as animals, honestly. A Good Samaritan sees that man, rushes over to him. He has compassion on him, rushes over to him, puts him on his own, right? So what does he do? What is Jesus saying? He's saying, it starts with the heart of compassion and brokenness. Then he gives up his own finances, his own, he had an animal, so he put him on an animal. He gave of what he had in his own hand. He puts him on the animal. He doesn't say, "Hey, come on, get up and walk next to me." No, he puts him on his own animal. He steps in. He gives him of his own privilege and puts him on there, gives his own money and tells the innkeeper, "Whatever else you need to do, I will pay it." And then he says, "Who is the name?" And that is a story, I believe, of that pain, that someone's saying, "No, I will not look away. I will not walk on the other side. I will press in." And I think in the same way, that story, Jesus, he's telling us our neighbor right now, always, there's so many people our neighbor, but I believe our neighbor is the Black community. Yeah. I believe our neighbor right now, that person who's robbed, half dead or fully dead, is the black community, the black people that are crying out, saying, would you stand with me? Would you listen? And would we be people that has compassion, and that anything that we have in our hand, that we will lend towards the healing of a community, towards the healing of a people, towards the healing of whatever we could do. It might not be everything, right? But whatever we could do, we would do what we can do to bring about change. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah, that's so good. I just want to, can I respond in 2 ways?
Say it, bro. Say it. Sorry, I went off my preacher.
No, bro, I needed that. I was over here responding like I never heard that story before.
Come on, dude.
But 2 things. What's so significant to me about that story in particular is the line at the beginning of love your neighbor as yourself.
Yeah, that's good.
Because I think if any of you, or if either of us are to think of like the ends of the earth we would go to for our personal needs and our personal selves,
right?
It's like, and the charge is God says, okay, look and examine how you love yourself, how you take care of your needs, how you will protect at all costs, like what belongs to you. He says, do the same thing for your neighbor. And so we see that in that story. He makes so much sacrifice and says, like, if you need more, I'm going to give more, because that's exactly what we would do for us.
Wow.
And so I agree with you. I feel like Jesus will yes, the black community in our nation right now can be seen as a neighbor. And to your question earlier about who is Jesus and where is Jesus in all of this, I think he's right in the middle of what's going 100%. On. And we talk about these people that are on the sideline that are just like critiquing everything that's going on, Right. There's an issue everywhere, and everybody's wrong, and everybody's messed up.
Right, through a post.
Through a post. Yeah. But Jesus is in the middle of the story.
Jesus with the people. He's
with the people. He's past curfew in the riots in Minneapolis. He's with the people and becoming proximate to the story that is happening. And he isn't on his computer making judgments. He is feeling the emotion and the pain of what's going on in the nation right now, and quite frankly, across the world now. And so I think that's our challenge, because again, Jesus isn't just our leader, he's our model. Yeah. And we get to be in the middle of what's happening and get our perspective and our understanding from that place, not from the outside, not having a perspective online or like from the outskirts of what's going on. And, so.
Yeah. And we'll pray and end, because I know we've gone a little bit longer than we usually do, but we feel like it's so important. I'll have you give in a second a final charge and pray. But today, just raw thoughts, I was thinking about this. Tell me if this resonates, Jay. I was thinking like, a lot of the past generation did a lot of reconciliation moments, And I feel like, Bishop Jake said, don't come and wash my feet. My feet are squeaky clean. He goes, stand with me. And I feel like it's like sometimes these even stage reconciliation moments where I'm like, I'm so sorry. And it's like we're apologizing for things that our ancestors did, right, from before, if you're white. And yes, those are powerful moments, but I think what we want, and 1 John 3:18 says, little children, let us not love in word or talk, but in deed and truth. And so I think sometimes these reconciliation moments almost might be even more for the white community to, not amused, but like almost like check that box. Okay, we did that. Yeah. But really what you're saying and charging to us is saying, no, stand with me. Yeah. Be with me until we see change. Yeah. And that's what we're seeing even with this generation, is they're not just wanting to be about one moment that brings change, but actually long-term change. You said it earlier. You said, this is a long road ahead, but we will see change. Yeah. And I just want to commend you, Jay, like your voice, I think not only in our community, but just even seeing you, today and so many times, I just feel like God's raising you up, and we just want you to know, but just that we're leaning in. We want to learn, we want to listen, and I think, I'll have him give a final charge, but there's so many other questions we could ask. There's so many things we could talk about. These are just a few, and if you have any questions, we want to answer those. Sure. And so, slide in a Christian way to the DMs, like ask questions. We want to have that. We will respond to every question. But I feel like the heart of this was, I wanted to hear John, right? Listen, learn, lend our privilege. I wanted to hear it. And then I want to, even in that story, Luke 10, gosh, compassion. My heart is broken for George Floyd. I'm praying for justice for his family. But in a larger way, systemic racism and everything. Like, this needs to end. We're in 2020, and I believe we will. I'm filled, even though my heart is broken, with faith and hope. And I really believe we're going to see that change. I really believe it, bro. So final words, and then pray for us. But, this is just the beginning of that conversation.
Yeah, for sure. I think we said it all, said most of it. I'm going to just jump right into prayer. Yeah, that's all right.
Yeah, do it.
Yeah, God, we just even turn to you in this moment and realize this is a fight that you're engaged in. This is a conversation that you're engaged in. We look at Jesus as a model, a man who asks so many questions. And so you are a God who's asking questions right now and pulling answers and pulling revelations out of people. And so, God, we just want to recognize that this is something that you do. You have conversations. You talk. You listen. And so, God, we just ask for anyone watching and even a recommissioning for ourselves that we would be one to take ownership over this. We take ownership over our neighbor, and that we love our neighbor as ourselves. Our neighbor's issues, our neighbor's pain becomes our pain and our issues. This isn't your issue, and this one over here is mine. When we see one struggling, we'll be ones who be first responders, be ones who are quick to the scene, and we will not be like the Levite. In Jesus' name. Amen.
Thank you, John. Seriously. Thank you. Profound. Again, thank you for watching. I believe this is just the beginning. The final even words is we believe in you as Circle Riders. If you're a part of high school, middle school, it starts now. Use your voice. Use your platform. Let's use our privilege. And this is one family. And so I just believe that God is using all of us together to see change. And so thank you again for watching. Any questions, we would love to talk with you. But until next Friday, let's keep standing. Let's keep pressing for justice. I believe in our time and in your generation, like we're going to see and already seeing massive change. And so thank you again for watching, John. Again, lastly, thank you for being here. And keep educating us, honestly. Keep teaching us. And we'll have actual practical steps on how to step out and be posting more of that. So thank you for watching. We love you guys. Thank you.